official Sunday. She will be back on July 21st for a well-deserved farewell with piano by Bonnie and accompaniment from some of our own musicians. A reception will follow. Please look for more details soon, and please begin to thank Bonnie after the service today.
Harder than it looks.
Yeah. What's the answer to that? We have a consultant.
I know, we need a consultant.
All right.
Here, why don't you just light this up?
I'll just light it with that. I'm an adult. Okay.
If we get too slick for you, let us know.
We light our chalice this morning for the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
Why church? Question, maybe not to ask all the people in this room. However, why church? Why did you get up this morning and say, you know what, it's a day outside. At least it's not snowing. It was snowing the last time I was here. It's a day outside, and there's so many different things that I could do, but I choose to walk through those doors, walk into this room, walk here to be with these people. Why church? To remember. Our bones are grown up from the dirt of this earth. Our voices made audible in the songs of the universe. Why church? To remember. I am unique and precious expression of that universe, and so are all of you, that the deep and truest self, the only thing worth searching for and finding out is who I am. Why church? To remember that one is not a whole number. That community gives us roots and wings. That strength comes from relationship and mutuality. Why church? To remember spirit and breath and life and love. Why church? To remember. To remember. Simply that. To remember.
It is time to gather. I would like to invite all the young and young at heart to come up forward and join me in a story or lesson. And I know there's more than just Ollie. Hi. So today we're talking about curiosity and humility. Humility, or being humble, is to have a modest or low view of your own importance. Or in reverse, it's not to think that you are better than all others. So I have a short story to give an example of this. So once, long ago, there was a wise Zen master, and people from far and near would seek his counsel and ask for his wisdom. And many would come and ask him to teach them, to enlighten them in the way of Zen. And he seldom turned anybody away. And one day, an important man, a man that was used to being in charge and having obedience, came to visit the master. I have come today to ask you to teach me about Zen. Open my mind to enlightenment. Well, the tone of the important man's voice was one that was kind of used to getting his own way. So the Zen master smiled and said that they should discuss the matter over a cup of tea. So when the tea was served, the master poured his visitor a cup. And he poured, and he poured, and he poured. And the tea rose to the rim of the cup and began to spill over onto the table and finally onto the robes of the wealthy man. So finally the visitor shouted, "Enough! You're spilling the tea all over. Can't you see that it is full?" And the master stopped pouring and smiled at his guest. "You are like this teacup, so full that nothing more can be added. Come back to me when the cup is empty. Come back to me with an empty mind." So by being present, one escapes the worries about the past or future. But being present is about more than escaping painful worries. It's also about noticing the gifts right in front of you in the moment that you are in. So to help notice and be present to these gifts, Buddhists recommend what's called the beginner's mind. It's basically about acting as if you are just learning or experiencing something for the first time. It's close to what we mean when we say go in with an open mind. Or to connect it to our monthly theme, it's about being curious rather than assuming that you already know the answer or already know how an experience will turn out. And that's how we notice the gifts of what's right in front of us. When we are humble rather than being a know-it-all, we are better able to learn things from others. When we approach every experience as if it's our first time of having it, we are surprised by things we haven't ever noticed before. When we stop assuming we know how things will turn out, we're more likely to give things a try. So that's what a beginner's mind is and does for us. So have any of you slipped into being a know-it-all? Now, usually it's not because you think that you're superior, it's just that you want to let people know that I do know about this. I have spent time learning about this. So I kind of want to let you know that I do know about what we're going to talk about. Have any of you become a know-it-all for something? You slipped into becoming a know-it-all and you let someone know what you know about something? Yeah? Do you got any examples? No? Do you think that maybe you've missed out on things because you've forgotten to bring an empty cup to a conversation or a relationship? Do you think that's possible, that you might have not heard the conversation that you were actually having because your cup was already full? Yeah, it's easy to slip into that. Let's all stand in body or spirit, and we're going to sing hymn number 1. May nothing ever cross this door. The youth and I will leave after the first verse. The words will be projected.
Thank you for being seated. This is the time in our service, in our gathering together, when we make space to share the joys and sorrows that you would like this community to hold. The hope is, of course, that the sorrows can be held within a space that is big enough to be able to hold them together. And that the joys might be amplified, because by sharing and knowing one another's journey, we can say hurrah and we can say salam, or peace. Into this one life, many memories have been formed. Into this one life, many tasks are still beckoning. Into this one life, sorrow and regret, joy and passion. Into this one life comes an awakening that we exist fully with one another. So we remember. We remember. Are there joys or concerns that will be brought forward today? all that was, and for all that yet shall be, we bear witness. We bear witness. We give thanks. We breathe with one another, and we remember. On this weekend, we also remember those who made an ultimate sacrifice, who gave their lives in service to freedom, in service to a cause that they may never have understood, but still they put themselves in the way of war or other things in order for us to be able to have freedom of speech, have freedom to marry who we choose, have freedom, at least now, have freedom to be able to live lives of meaning. We give thanks to these people, and we remember them here in this service today with these words from Reverend Amy Shaw.
Attending by Amy Shaw. For all who die in war, for all who live in suffering in the aftermath of violence, for all who have served, we lift up our hearts. For our country and our world, for a planet that will find peace, for the young and the innocent, we lift up our hearts. For the weary and the war-torn, for those who pray, for those too angry to cry, we lift up our hearts. For all of us, for the many names of God, Shanti, Shalom, peace, Salam, Amen.
If there are those among us who have served, whose elders have served, who have family members who have served, if you would do us the honor of standing now so that we might recognize you. Thank you. Thank you, and those who you love for your service. This reading is called In Silence by John Braun. What is required of us in our time is that we go down into uncertainty, where what is well known is not well known, that we go down into the most human. It sounds a little bit like the story this morning, where living men have vanished and the music of their meaning has been trapped and sealed. What is asked of us in our time is that we break open our blocked caves and we find each other. Nothing less will heal the anguished spirit nor release the heart to act in love. What is required of us in our time is that we go down into uncertainty. How often have we spent time there? I was visiting someone in a hospital, and I spotted a sign for a rooftop garden. My curiosity led my feet, as is wont to do, because finding a place of refuge in the chaotic setting of a hospital, in the chaotic setting of our world, has always intrigued me. Perhaps it is the description of ministry. Just off the oncology ward, a full city block had been risen and transformed from the bustle of everyday life. In the middle was a low, long, round fountain. Not the gallons of water spurting into the air kind of fountain, but a silent fountain, a huge bowl with water just slipping over the edges. As I sat, I spotted a leaf on this smooth surface, and suddenly this little whirlpool right next to it, and the leaf got away. It floated by, and more whirlpools formed, and it got captured and floated away, and more whirlpools formed, and eventually one of those whirlpools sucked the leaf down. It actually made my heart sad. I'm soft-hearted, as you have already, of course, seen today. But then the leaf popped up again, a little farther away, and continued its journey, floating and avoiding, floating and escaping, floating and getting sucked down, only to be released again, a little ways away. Kind of like life, right? We know this. We know that no one gets away just floating on the surface of life. We know that the whirlpools are out there, and certainly we know that they can capture us at times. We will get sucked down to where there's no air to breathe, to where it is disconcertingly different. Health, work, family, any one of these can claim us. We know that life is out there, and at some point, it will be our turn to get sucked into the whirlpool that wasn't there a moment before. Obviously, all whirlpools are a little different. Some are compounded on top of one another, a whirlpool within a whirlpool within a whirlpool. Some are complicated by other things. If you've lost your job, hopefully you haven't, but if you ever have, you know that part of the whirlpool is going to be having to put yourself in the way of someone else's judgment about what your life looks like now as you try to find more work. If you've lost a partner, the spinning might be losing a person, maybe the very person that you would lean on to get through these kind of times. If you live in a violent area, part of that spinning whirlpool might just be finding someplace that's safe once the fighting stops. If the fighting stops, some whirlpools feel like they last whole lifetimes, and some seem so small and inconsequential as we look on from far away. But if you're in the midst of a whirlpool, it does not matter the size. It is disorienting to float, avoid, escape, and then to get sucked down into the abyss of a change. Even joyous whirlpools can be disorienting. At some point, though, the whirlpool usually lets go, and we float back into what looks like a normal life, right? There was that leaf, it got sucked down. It's there again. Maybe a little wetter, but it's there again. We pop back to the surface, glad for the air. We pop up, and have you ever noticed, though, that you're not exactly the same? That life indeed has touched you, that something has changed in you. Whether by choice or accident, life happens, and we are changed. I'm going to ask you to remain seated and sing with me, Calm Soul of all things. I think the words will be up on the screen in just a moment. calmer moments of my life, I can hold on to the image of the whirlpool and know its truth. And I can fight for it to be okay, for all of us not to be okay. But it's about as countercultural as you might ever imagine. Even with this hat disguising my now mostly bald head, we can see, right? Not a lot of hair here. I call myself Chicken Girl with my wife. At some point, I'm sure that I'm going to draw on my head just to make it fun for myself. But even with this disguise, people still come up and ask. And that's how I'm doing, and that's not a bad thing. But I am relentless. I am relentless in the cultural truth that I know that I am supposed to say, fine, I'm fine. Or maybe on a good day I'll say, I'm pretty good considering. I am relentless in the desire for the culture that I live within, to ignore the whirlpools and pretend as if they never really happen, at least not to me. My response, and I'm sure that you all have never had this happen to you, right? You've never said, no, I'm fine, when you haven't been. Please laugh at that. You know? Really, otherwise it's like, But it's such a cultural norm that it comes up in our humor. Monty Python fans? Anyone out here a Monty Python? Yay, okay. Remember the night sketch? The sketch is Monty Python, full on Monty Python. King Arthur comes up to a bridge, you know, coconuts and all, wanting to get over it, and there's a knight guarding the bridge, and the knight says, "You shall not pass." And King Arthur says, "I need to get over the bridge." And so we will battle. I will not let you pass. And King Arthur's a pretty good knight, so he fairly quickly cuts off the other knight's arm, and he is, of course, in Monty Python humor, spurting blood everywhere. And he picks up his sword with his other hand. He says, it is but a scratch. I have had much, much worse. I will battle on with you. And so battle on they do, and the other arm goes, and then, of course, both the legs. And finally, the knight is laying on the ground, spurting blood everywhere. Come back! I am still in good enough health to take you on. Oh, my God. The knight, or I might say we, are incapable of accepting that life changes. When we're in the whirlpool or floating afterwards and trying to figure out how to relate, logic would tell us that to reclaim life after a whirlpool event means reorienting yourself, like figuring out where you came out, figuring out what's going on, and then accepting that something happened, maybe even telling the stories of that happening to other people, because we found that telling stories actually allows us to restore our life, just like that remembering. But we live in a culture that encourages us to enthusiastically deny how life affects us, affirming instead for all of us to appear as if everything is just fine. The bills have been paid, the kids are off to school, the car payment's been made, we're good, right? It is why the night sketch is so hilarious and so devastating at the same time. We deny the effects of our life at our own peril. When we maintain or are culturally asked to maintain our old lives, when we're in a new place, right, a little disoriented, I'm going to stay right here, this is who I am, ignore the fact that I'm over here now, maybe I should move the microphone. We compartmentalize, we act out, we regress. We do things to shove away that new part of the life that doesn't fit who we thought we were going to be, through drinking, through anger, through gambling. For those facing huge whirlpools like war on this Memorial Day, this can be a catastrophe, and we can give lasting impacts through things like PTSD or soul injury. We remember the effects of life-threatening encounters and the results of ignoring their impact and what that impact can be. And perhaps because of that, it is most clearly seen for us today on those who have served in war zones and how we as a culture have treated people who come back home who aren't whole. People have been writing about how some soldiers have a negative response to war for centuries. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote about warriors with no wounds. The 16th century Spanish physicians used to use the term estar roto, literally meaning to be broken. In 1863, the first U.S. military institution was opened for Civil War soldiers who had an exhausted heart. At the beginning of World War I, the military did nothing, let that sink in, did nothing for shell shock, because at that point they had decided that the conditions were caused by physical shocks to the head, even though by the end of the conflict they had realized that it was mostly related to an emotional response. So in the 1900s, most professionals stigmatized those suffering with being weak in character, even though some say that twice as many soldiers experienced psychological casualties as a response to war as those who were wounded or killed. The science of that time that was indeed supported by 3,000 years of thought, stigmatized those who were adversely affected by the brutal acts that they witnessed or were asked to perform as simply feeble, denying to themselves and those who were wounded that the experience of war could have had an effect on a person's life. What psychologist R.D. Laing might call a sane response to an insane situation. During World War II, potential soldiers were actually screened to determine if they could find out who was going to be the best soldier to be able to go into the catastrophe of war and not be affected by the brutal things that they saw. Amazingly enough, this did not work. Perhaps that's a good thing. Soldiers then were still affected, and many tried to fit back into our society without ever acknowledging that they had been changed or that it had cost them deeply. My grandfather, he might be an example. Here was a stoic man who drank every single night, 2 scotches. We didn't even think about asking why he was doing that at the time. He generally used anger to control his children and his wife. Life was not a place of joy for him ever. And I wonder now what it might have been like for this intelligent and committed man if he had been able to talk about why he was angry, if he'd been able to share the stories of what he had experienced, if he had been able to hold out for us to find instead of through his hand, instead of through looking through their stuff at the end of his life when we were going through his home, why he held on to 4 lapel insignia from Mussolini's army. I know he served in Germany. Who had they belonged to? What was their meaning? Imagine if he had gotten caught into that whirlpool and someone had given him the dignity to come back out on the other side and simply listen, bear witness, hold onto. Steve Bentley, an expert in PTSD, writes, having closed off and numbed themselves in order to survive, returning soldiers are then faced with the task of working their way back towards humanity, end quote. Soldiers working their way back towards living a new life that is before them now, not the one that they might ever have dreamed of, not the one that they left on ships and airplanes and by foot or any other means, not what they imagined, but instead what is now. But most of these people did that by themselves. It should be no surprise that government surveys state that those people who have put themselves in the way of war, chosen or not, suffer rates of alcoholism greater than the average population, and this always startling fact that the number of Vietnam vets who have taken their life through their own hands since the end of the war far exceeds those who died in combat. People are affected by the lives that they live. We are changed by life. Facing illness, losing a job, getting divorced, living with symptoms that marginalize us because of class or race or ability. While the history of PTSD and soul wounding brought by the military engagement is an extreme example of our cultural denial, it is in its extremity that we can often see more clearly the realities that all of us are facing. If we're not to be affected by war, then what is the message for the rest of your life? Guess what, folks? You may face trauma, but you are not to appear to be affected. Not supposed to talk, not supposed to grieve or rant or anguish or regret or otherwise be changed by the experiences of life. Because those, my friends, are signs of weakness. In this place of hope, I hope that we can say no, as you just did by applauding for someone and all the people who came forward to share this morning. What is weak? Let me tell you, this is where I stand, and I hope it's where you stand as well. What is weak is expecting life to stay the same regardless of our experience. What is weak is refuting that whirlpools like poverty, violence, racism exist so that they don't need to be eradicated and our world transformed. What is weak is trying to control the world by denying that we are ever changed by it or by the lives that we choose to live. Whirlpools happen. They happen to those around us. Let us here remember. Why, church? To rest in that knowledge and live as if we can be the refuge from the onslaught of always trying to be fine. What would it look like, my friends, for you today, just for the next hour, to sit and say, I am not going to ask that question unless I have time for the answer. And I'm not going to give an answer that is trite. I'm going to trust that the person that is across from me that is asking it wants to know. Wants to know. Talk about transforming the world. Let us rest in this knowledge that here we might live in this refuge from the onslaught of always trying to be fine. This is the work we engage as a community of faith, as individuals and as a whole, to bear witness and offer a place to float after the whirlpool has let go. I wonder if this community can be a place where we allow those present to at least be able to set down the heavy burden of living as if nothing has happened in the aftermath of life. Can this be a place that radically acknowledges whirlpools so that individuals, once ready, because sometimes we can't let go of that old life that we're holding on to so hard, that once the individual is ready to let go, that they can let go of the denial themselves, making room to remember. Like the fountain, as a religious community, we gather in the presence of all of these verities. We are the water and the leaves, smooth and filled with whirlpools, always so close to the edge of change. Imagine a person who lost their job, bidden to rest, simply rest for a moment in another's grief, witness of that grief. Not giving answers, not pulling out our Rolodex and saying, wait, no, I can do, but instead to just be present. Imagine a child reaching for the goal of learning something brand new, of being brought to a place that they are utterly surprised by and encouraged to let go of perfection as a goal, to instead be in that space of learning and curiosity. Imagine a soldier welcomed home and encouraged to tell their stories. Imagine telling somebody that has seen some of the most brutal things in life that you would be willing to hold that with them. Imagine a community gathering together, encouraging each other to speak about pain and confusion or loss. Imagine a community that is holding on to the forming edge of life and the unknown, instead of only on to what was. This is what I know is in this room today. I don't know who, but someone's spinning. Someone's spinning. Someone is watching. Someone is just coming up for air and has no idea where they are. Oh, and some of us are floating in that, whoop, got away. Oh, hold it, whoop, got away. This is the horrible, awkward beauty of life. All of this is happening around us all the time. For those who are sucked down, please hold on to this truth that whirlpools are real, that this isn't just something that you're imagining, and that that's okay. This is life. For those who are surfacing, remember that grace of acknowledging that we can live only with what is today. If I want to talk over there, I can do it, but somehow I've got to move the microphone. And for those of us that are watching, hope rests in what we hold. It rests in our lived faith that all are worthy of dignity and respect, that all stories can be heard and held, that every single one of us together has the capacity, no single one person, but all of us together, sharing and listening and acknowledging. Can we be this for one another, even for an hour? The pool of water surrounding the leaf as it emerges into a new and different place. The pool, waiting and watching and supporting, reaching out to one another to find meaning in our shared experience of life. It may seem like a really incredibly small thing, but the road to living the full life that you have now in front of you includes all of these things. It is so simple and hard at the same time to stand and bear witness to someone else's life as they tell it. It is to find a place where you can be honest, to live into whatever comes next. Because the whirlpools don't stop, do they? Be curious. Really, be curious. What do you actually know about the people that are sitting next to you or behind you? Be real. Take that chance. Take that amazing, hard-won chance to actually say your truth as you're listening to someone else's. Why church? Indeed, to remember, to remember, to remember.
We are this church. We are its hands, its hearts, its voice. Together we share the wealth of this community, and we sustain it with our gifts. The offering for the support of this church will now be taken.
Thank you so much. Whirlpools. Crap. Sometimes yay, but mostly crap. They are a part of life. So it is our response to them that will define us as individuals and as communities. They are a part of life. It is our response to them that define us as individuals and as communities. How will you be formed? What will you support, will you offer to each other, to yourself? What will you ask for? Because, oh my gosh, having just had 2 parents die in the last year, I can tell you that asking for help is another thing that I could preach on for an hour, but I won't. So, lucky you, you're going to be able to get out of here. How do we support each other? To love fully is to accept loss. To create wildly is to accept change. And to live is to accept each other in all our verities of life, even in death. I hope that you will rise now and join with me in singing our final hymn, Glory, Glory, number 201 in your hymnals. And we've got words up here on the screen. Thank you, whoever is in the back, for working on this with us. And at some point, you can clap with me. Of us in our time is that we break open our blocked caves and find each other. Nothing less will heal the anguished spirit nor release the heart to act in love. Go out, my friends, and act in love. Find that love. Be that love within this world that is weeping for it right now. You can start in this room, greeting one another, and eventually make it for coffee, just in case you need that sustenance. Thank you so much.